Hello, and welcome back to another little edition of Finding the Balance. Me, Chase, here to make another little episode here, making this one rather early in the morning because I got things I want to do here later on today, and I've been kind of inspired a little bit, I guess, to talk about storytelling, which is a passion of mine, something I really want to be able to do on like a regular basis and make a pretty good living off of it. That'd be nice, but the Lord's always in control and it's always His work. So, but I want to try and not talk so much about news and stuff today. I want to try and just talk about storytelling and why I think storytelling is a powerful tool that can be used by the church to reach the culture of death all around us. And I was kind of inspired by it because yesterday, man, it was just crazy yesterday. Yesterday, I sat and I wrote for I think I did a total of 3, 4, maybe even 5 hours of writing yesterday. In a total. I mean, obviously I took a couple breaks. I'm still doing reading. See the stack of books right behind me is the stuff I'm reading. Now, it's not as crazy as it looks. This is a devotional book by Spurgeon that I have. It was given to me by my former pastor. This is my church history from Nick Needham. I'm still reading. I'm about halfway through that. And this is my ESV study Bible, and this is my Dan Wallace book, Revisiting the Corruption of the New Testament, and that's my latest Bible right here, my NET I got for Christmas. And this is my Greek stuff, learning Greek. Oh, the one on the bottom, not even seeing all this. That's the Greek, NET, Dan Wallace's book, my ESV, my devotional right here of Spurgeon, and then my church history thing. So that's the stuff I'm working on right now in terms of reading. So I kind of mostly am just reading this. Yeah, so that's kind of what I've been doing, like sort of in between and stuff like that. So that's basically what I've been doing almost this entire time. In between finding some work here and there, which is nice to have on a consistent basis, but trying to look on some of the bright side of having a lot of this time to just kind of do things that I normally wouldn't be able to do because of this, just the busyness. It is a blessing, and I am grateful for it, even though there's still there is a part of me that is a little worried. Yeah. Most definitely. But getting a bunch of writing done yesterday, and not only writing, but also just like things are coming together in the story, at least in my mind. I hope people who read it will like it. It's kind of coming together in a way that I really wanted it to. I feel like maybe I'm getting too ahead of myself here, but I feel like I'm at that point now where you're seeing a bunch of pieces in different areas starting to kind of converge, and they're all gonna. I think one of the that's one of the things I want to be able to do, and I love to see in like movies and shows and in books and stuff like that. I love to see a bunch of pieces that seem sort of scattered, but they're all still connected, obviously, and then they all come home. In the very end, they all come together, and as they get closer and closer together, when everything's set, all the pieces are set for the one final clash at the very end, it just makes you go, man, dude, what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen? What's gonna happen? And that like for an example, in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, I love the Pirates of the Caribbean movies except for the last two. Last two were pretty bad, but the first three were really good. But especially in the last two, because. Well, actually, all of them, because the cool thing is you just have different characters with different intentions, right? So if you look at Dead Man's Chest, you have Will. He has one reason why he wants the chest, and then Jack wants his reason why he wants the chest, and then Lorrington has his reason why he wants it, and then of course Davy Jones has his, and Elizabeth is, she's just trying to find Will, and it's cool to see as the movie and this, their desires and their wants for it, they're not just things that kind of come up suddenly at the end. They're sort of foreshadowing it as in the beginning parts of the movie and towards the middle. They're setting everything up for a final showdown at the very end, and you're asking yourself the question, who's coming out on top? And I just love that element. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do a little bit of in my own novel, which is I'm titling Masters of Eldraine. It's a fantasy novel, but what I want to do is use fantasy and fiction to try and get important messages across to people. Not just straight up entertainment. Obviously you do, because it is a form of entertainment. You want to entertain people, obviously, but to make it more than that. And so, in terms of talking about story, I guess I'll just start here if I haven't started already. But one of the things I want to be able to do is to kind of help to disillusion our culture to this. I think honestly, a lot of times when you think about it, in most of our television shows and movies and even books and stuff like that, there's a kind of dualism going on. And by dualism, what I mean is you have the clear light side, like in Star Wars, right? So you have the light side, then you have the dark side, and that's really it. It's a battle between light and dark. But it's very clear who the bad guy is. And even in the Lord of the Rings, as much as I love the Lord of the Rings, it kind of has a similar thing to it, where the enemy is like really easy to tell. It's really easy to tell who the bad guys are, and it is this when you hear people in the Star Wars talking about their philosophy and stuff like that, unless you're reading one of the novels. Now, when I read the novels that come out, that I don't know if they're considered canon or not, but I've read some of the Star Wars novels. Now, those are pretty interesting, the way they explain. So I read what was that Star Wars novel? Deceived or something like that. And they put a lot of work into following Darth Malgus in that series, as much as they follow the protagonists. And the book takes you into Malgus's mind and how he thinks, and he's obviously a Sith, and he's the bad guy, but he has a very he has a you could say a rational philosophy. The idea that peace makes weakness, and that we strive on conflict. And he's kind of right, to be honest with you. He is kind of right. But of course he's insane, and he's ruthless and evil, and will kill anybody who to get what he wants, stuff like that. But it presents the dark side in a much more realistic manner, I think, because what we have to understand about what the reality of things is that real bad guys don't really think they're bad guys. They think that what they're doing is good, and that usually means that they have a philosophy, a worldview that justifies the things that they're doing. They're not, as we are typically known to see, like in the Lord of the Rings, where they just want to set the world on fire. They're typically not like that. Now, there are some that are like that, like Christopher Nolan's Joker. But even then, he still has a very... there is a sense of a... Like, the Joker still has a worldview. And his worldview obviously is an anarchical worldview. So there's that element too. But like that's one of the reasons why they remade Thanos' character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The original Thanos just kind of loved death. He just loved to just blow stuff up and just be evil, because he was in love with this female entity called Death. I think it's called Death. But anyways, and Lady Death. Oh no, I don't think that's what it was. Anyways, but that's was his original character. He was just this kind of weird, and he didn't sound anything like he does in the movie, at least when he came to life on the cartoons that I'm aware of. But he was just sort of just a psychopath, just crazy dude. And this Thanos, obviously, they wanted to make him more his worldview much more realistic. That would portray a more realistic evil person, But the point is, all that to say that I don't want in my story, I want there to be a lot of shade, gray area. I had mentioned, see, one of the things to me is that we're living in a world today where we want to be certain of who the bad guys are or who the enemy is. We want that certainty, and that's what we grew up in. That's kind of like what our previous generations grew up with too. And the clear enemy was Hitler, obviously. The clear enemy was the Soviet Union, and that kind of mindset we grow into. Traditionally, and that same generation makes all those old cartoons, and so when they're making all those old cartoons, they did the same thing. It's just like it's very clearly who the bad guys are and very clearly who the good guys are. But in reality, though, that's not really the case. Obviously, Hitler was a bad guy, but for instance, most of the documentaries you would watch on World War II, it would be just basically Hitler's socialism versus Western's democracies. Now, apart from the fact that the United States has a very, very unique and particular democracy that I would say isn't really a democracy, it's a constitutional republic. That is, it's a federal government that is conformed to a creed. But anyways, so you look at that, but obviously the Western democracy powers have to stand up against this totalitarianism of Hitler's socialism. But is democracy really the answer, though? Is democracy, in the end, a good way? When you really look at it, no, it's not. So while it happens to be on the good side in this conflict, and it it's intended for the freedom of men, it never really ends that way. And when it's taken to its logical conclusion, democracy is just a gateway to totalitarianism. The totalitarianism of the majority, the mob, over the minority. So the city folk get to tell the farmer what he's to do with all of his land, basically. And that's what it ends up becoming in the end. So there's those kinds of elements that I want to explore in my own novel writing. So there's so let me just kind of give an example in my story, and I'm going to try my best not to spoil things too much. It's kind of hard to do that when I haven't even written most of the stuff yet. But in my story, you have let me see if I can make sure I do this right according to the camera, because I think we're a little kind of opposite. But in Western, so you would have, there's basically the whole story takes place, and I'm making I'm drawing out the map sort of thing, like of the world that this takes place in. It's a fantasy world and all that stuff. A fantasy world called Eldraon. And it's basically divided into two major continental structures. And but it's at the same time, it also is considered a single region, giant region, or a continent in another sense. In other words, it's all basically northern Eldraon, and but as a continent, it's normally called Enugia. And you have Western Anusia and Eastern Anusia. And Western Anusia and Eastern Anusia are separated by a kind of a large, what's it called? I guess you could say a large sea. Yeah, it's basically separated by a large sea that comes in from the north and south. And they meet they barely meet at the southern end. And they're just divided by a nice sizable river. And so that's, if you can kind of get the picture a little bit. So you have Western and Eastern Anusia, and down the middle right here is mostly a sea. And then they kind of come together a little bit, but are just separated by a river. That's basically it. Now, obviously, there's going to be more to the detail of the map and all that stuff, but I'm giving you the basic thing of it. But so I have two stories that take place in the novel. One of them takes place primarily on the eastern end, and the other one takes place on the western end. Now, the western end of Anusia is let me start with the eastern end. The eastern end is where everything begins, like the world sort of begins from the east, kind of like in our world, honestly. You really kind of notice that humanity begins somewhere in the African region and sort of starts to spread out from there. And so that's kind of the same thing here. It starts from the east in the lower southern eastern areas and starts to kind of spread out. The reason why I did it that way is intentionally to purposefully relate to our world, because I do want this to relate to our world in many ways. So I want them to make it relatable and much more easier. I think it's easier to understand a fantasy world when it's still based a lot, not too much, but a lot on our real world. So that's kind of what I did. So, it starts from in the east. This is the history of the world of Eldaron. It starts in the east and starts to slowly, gradually make its way out to the west. Now, at this point in time, most of the east is pretty well developed. Excuse me. And under the control currently of what's called the Anusian Union. The Anusian Union is sort of like the UN. It's a unity of different nation states in Eastern Anusia that was formed after a certain particular event that happened before this the events take place in the novel when you start reading. Those are events that you explore, that you'll begin to explore as you read the novels, but that, Lord willing, I get to write. But as you get to the west, though, the farther west you go, Anusia, so the Anusian Union tries to claim territory in the west and there's a lot of tribalistic wars going on over there in its own from a bunch of primitive civilizations and stuff like that. And so again, it's kind of like the Wild West that happened here a couple hundred years ago, so 100 or so years ago. So it's kind of like that that kind of thing that happened. And what happened was the Anusian Union just didn't have the resources to maintain the West. It had again, because of certain events that I was just talking about, that you learn about as the book goes on. Wars broke out in Eastern Anusia, and they just didn't have the resources to maintain control. And so what happened was a lot of outlaws escaped from the law in the east and went west, because that's where there was far less governmental control, and they just basically started taking over things in the west. And so the west is not entirely given over to anarchy, but the farther west and southwest you go, it basically is. And that's where Kratos basically finds himself in the story. He finds himself in a world that is mostly anarchy to the core, but there is some form and structure in it. Some people began to realize that we got to have some kind of structure out here, because otherwise it's just impossible to live. So there is some structure, but the people who run the place are just basically mercenaries and former military guys, former criminals and stuff like that, who've live out there and control the place. So the point is that you're going to see in book one a push by a particular group that Stratos knows about towards trying to free an area that Stratos is going to spend the majority of the last part of book one. Is they're trying to free that area because it's an important area. It's kind of a strategic area. Free it from the control of a ruthless mercenary leader, and it's kind of basically start a little bit of an uprising there. But there's still a lot of, at the same time, so it's to free the people there, but there's still a lot of talk and a lot of worldview. In the book, you're going to see as well, there's these group of people out there who just basically are complete and total liberalists. They in the sense of they not only believe that that they're the kinds of people who don't believe in absolutes. They believe that in pluralism, things like that, but they use the rhetoric of liberty and freedom to appeal to people. That's just what people like, So, on the one hand, they seem like they're on the right side. That they're against the Anusian Union and it's all of its laws and international rules that try to keep things together and put people under its power and control in order to maintain order. So they're against all that, and you're like, okay, that's cool. But then they don't believe in gods. They don't believe in the God. They just believe in human, complete, utter human autonomy. So all that to show that just because one side happens to be fighting on, at least in one conflict, on the right side, doesn't mean they're always right, that they're always good. Each of these movements have flaws in them, and that's one of the things I want to explore in my storytelling, is that it's the right and wrong is not always so easy to tell, and it's just a reality of the world we live in. Good guys do bad things. Bad guys sometimes even do good things, more so than the good guys do. So that's one of the things I want to explore. But I was thinking about this the other day too. So I was, I began to sort of look at, and I think some of this was happening as I was watching the latest Men in Black movie, which wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Because I thought it was going to be another woke thing. I think, and I think one of the things that caught me thinking about this is that all the rehashed plot lines. Oh yeah, you know what? Actually, I was thinking about that movie Warrior with I forgot that one guy's name, but the other guy's Tom Hardy. I love that guy. He's a great actor. Such an amazing actor. It's one of my favorites. But it's with Tom Hardy, and it's a great movie. I originally, when I saw the commercials and stuff like that for that movie, and it's obviously not a very big budget movie. It wasn't a huge movie or anything like that, but it was an awesome movie. It was such a great movie. But I don't like sports movies. They're just the same thing over and over again, and it's so boring. It is one of the most repetitive genres of movies in the world. You can just predict so easily what's going to happen next. And this was kind of like, this looked like another one of those. This looked like another Rocky knockoff kind of thing like that in the commercials and stuff. But when I actually watched the movie, it wasn't anything like that. It was nothing like that. In fact, when you watch the movie, the sort of lore, you could say, of fighting for something, whatever. That's all that really is. All that stuff you see in the movie, all the fighting, all the prepping for fights and stuff like that, is just, it becomes the backstory to the real story, which is brotherly love and fatherly love, father to son and brother to brother kind of love, and what can happen to the tragedy that can happen to a family that's just broken apart by tragedy. And coming back together, and what does it take to bring everybody back together? It was loving each other, showing each other that you love each other more than anything. I love you as a brother. You are my brother, kind of like that. And I will always love you. And you are my father. You are my son. I will always love you. And it's just because, and again, this is another one of those. There was another one of those movies that there's no clear bad guy really. It's broken people trying to help each other. Everybody in there is broken, trying to help each other. Even and Tommy, who's Tom Hardy's character, he's sort of portrayed as sort of like he seems to be portrayed as the bad guy, but when you explore his story very clearly, he's not the bad guy. He's a broken brother who needs the love of his brother and the love of his father. And his father's broken too. And at the very end, I mean, it's just a beautiful ending because, and I get a little choked up every time I'm thinking about it. But it's a beautiful ending because Tommy's clearly lost the fight to his brother because he's got like either a dislocated or a broken arm. So he can only fight with one hand, and that's almost impossible to do. It's not impossible. It's happened before in the UFC, but it's almost impossible to do. And he ends up losing. His brother gets him in the choke. He just tells him, just tap out, man. Just tap out. It's okay. And then, he wouldn't tap out. He just wouldn't tap out. Tommy wouldn't tap out. He's a character who's just so angry and just, like I said, just broken and lost. And one of the things that the story is trying to do is at least as I see it, is can you fix, and I don't want to go too much into detail of what Tommy's struggling with, but I think I've already spoiled the movie enough. But I think what Tom Hardy's character struggles with is, can you fix the mistakes of the past? And he's trying to fix the mistakes of his past, the great regrets of his past. And he kind of realizes in the end that he can't. And the more he tries to run, the more he's really running away from it. He just can't. You can't fix the past. The past is where it is. That's it. What he needs is love to help him move on. And that's exactly what he gets in the very end. That's what he needed all along. He didn't need to fight and all this stuff. He just needed to know that he was loved by his brother and by his father. And so in the very end, when he's being choked out and he's lost, he was just that close to winning this thing for his guys in the army, and he lost, and it was like, so close but so far away. But he realizes then that wasn't what he needed. And so when he's being choked out, his brother just finally says, it's okay, Tommy, it's okay, just tap out. And I get choked up, man. It's just such a great movie. And he just finally says, I love you. And that's when Tommy taps out. He taps him out. He says, I'm done. And that's, oh man. It's beautiful. It is just so beautiful. And the movie basically ends right there. His brother, Tommy's brother, I forgot his name because it's been a while since I've seen it, but his brother doesn't want all the congratulations. He just takes takes Tommy, and they just leave together. I need to be with my brother. It's a great movie, and you see what it did though is it took an old idea of fighting, the Rocky thing like that, and the fighting and stuff like that, and it took that old sort of worn out sort of story plot line, but it used that as a catalyst to make a different point. I hope you see what I'm saying. So in other words, all the fighting, all the combat you see in the movie and stuff like that, it just basically becomes a backdrop to get to the real message of the movie. And I think that's when I kind of sort of started to realize that what makes a good story? A good story is something. It begins with a message. It begins with a message that you're trying to convey, and it takes a plot line to deliver the message. I think that's what real storytelling is all about. So you look in the Lord of the Rings, what what was the main message that Tolkien was trying to convey? Well, I think he was trying to convey a lot of messages, to be honest with you. But the triumph of good over evil. I think Tolkien was writing during, the World War II crisis and stuff like that. And I think it shows in the novel because Mordor, all the evil comes from the east. That's where Hitler was coming from in his day, and all that stuff. So I just think that's, I'm trying to sort of read between the lines in a sense there, but what he did is he used old, sort of just your standard fairy tale devices. So elves, dwarves, humans, and dragons and whatnot, so he used the basic standard formula of fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons kind of thing, to deliver a message. It's kind of like the Trojan horse, the Trojan horse of peace. It's just the same old thing, but what's inside is something more important. It's what's inside of the message, that's inside of the story. That is the important thing. I think that's what really makes good storytelling is you use, because everybody's always talking about, man, I want to see something different. I want to see something different. It's kind of hard to really make something different nowadays. Honestly, I think when you do that to people, I think you set them up for too much to you set the standard too high. So my story, again, my story is based in a fantasy realm. There's elves, there's dwarves, there's basically humans, which I just call Aenmen, but they're basically the humans. So I have all that same stuff, and dragons and magic and things like that. But all of that is simply a means to an end, really, when you think about it. It's a way to convey a certain man, my nose is just itching me right now. A certain message to an audience. That's really what I think a story has to begin with. It has to begin with a message. What do I want to tell people? What's something I'm trying to get across? And you would that's where you start. You start from there. At the same time, also, you have to always remember. I think one of the things you have to keep in mind always. See, when I first started writing this story, it was years ago. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no concept of what story structure was, making stories, and I also had no concept of a resolution. In my early days, because when you're young and you're kids, you just don't really think about these things too much. So I just started writing just willy-nilly, just going wherever the heck the story was going. I was being controlled by the narrative rather than controlling the narrative myself. You don't want to be the one being controlled by the narrative. And so the story ends up going way off to in left field, and I have no idea how I got there. And I mean, just making things up as I go. And the reason why that happens, if that happens to anybody who may be watching this, but the reason why that happens is because you really don't have a resolution, or if you do have a resolution, you don't really care much about it. And so you have to have a resolution, and it's one I am still kind of working on. I have no idea how I want to end this thing, to be honest with you. I'm at the point where I don't know how to end it, but I do know the grand points that I want to make before I end it. And those are important for me to reach. And but you have to have, in some sense, a resolution in mind, a way to resolve things. If you don't have that, you're setting yourself up for failure. That's one of the reasons why The Walking Dead is just it's just a terrible show. It's just crap, because there's no resolution. There's no all the creators of that show, all they care about, honestly, what I think all they really care about is just they're trying to get the ratings. They're trying to just keep this thing going as long as they can and suck as much money out of it as they possibly can. That's all they care about. And that's one of the problems with storytelling today, is most people in Hollywood and stuff like that see Hollywood just kind of, it's more of a business. And I understand there's got to be a business aspect to this kind of work, but that shouldn't be the driving factor. Just like for me, the driving factor of, my job is not because I have a passion for cars, but it's because I have a passion for other things that my job allows me to do. So storytelling has to be a passion, and a message that you want to get across has to be a passion. And then there's still all those little elements and stuff like that, but I'll try to talk a little bit briefly about those. But just to finish my point here, you have to have some kind of way in which the great problem that is presented in the story is going to be resolved. If you don't have that, it's just aimless, pointless, and all that stuff. And it also is sort of reflective. If you look at like The Walking Dead, for instance, it's reflective of a worldview. So obviously, it seems to me that the creators of The Walking Dead, the worldview behind all of it is nihilism. There is no resolution. Everybody has a worldview that they carry into the things that they do. That especially is true for storytelling. If you don't believe in redemption, if you don't believe in resolution, finality, and stuff like that, then then nothing that happens in the story really means anything. It doesn't mean anything. All the heartbreak, all the love, all the joy, all the betrayal, all the suffering means absolutely nothing in the very end. And that's kind of like what The Walking Dead does. Because what The Walking Dead loves to do to you, it loves to get a character and suddenly give him a moment of happiness and joy, and then just rob him of it. Just take it away. It does that constantly. It's one of the reasons why I just hate it. I'm just like, I'm sick of this thing. This thing sucks. It's just a horrible show. Anyways, but it doesn't mean that suffering isn't important in a story. Obviously, I have suffering in my story. I have heartbreak in my story. There's going to be a lot of heartbreak, trust me. There's going to be people dying that it will be sad. But it's all for a purpose, though. I have a reason for it. I have a point I'm trying to get across. And so let me just, I guess maybe just kind of talk a little bit about the characters themselves. The story of Masters of Eldryon, my story, begins, and notice I said begins. It begins by following two characters. As the story progresses, you're gonna come in contact with a lot of different characters. Some of whom, I know it's gonna seem like for a while, it seems like it's sort of like what the Game of Thrones thing did, which is like freaking ton of characters that was following. Just it gets so scrambled and confused. What I want to try to do is not do that by having a lot of characters, but just some characters. The emphasis on these characters' stories just sort of fades out a little bit. Not too much, but fades out a little bit. And I'm kind of following a biblical model of storytelling. So in the Bible, you have periods of time where like David's the big guy. He's the big character is being followed, but after a while David's out of the picture. And then the same thing in Acts. If you look at Acts, Peter seems to be the head honcho of the church. Peter, and maybe a little bit of James, even though James isn't talked about nearly as much as Peter is, because I think Luke was following Peter more often. But but after a while the emphasis turns to Paul, very much so. It turns to Paul. It's not to say that Peter wasn't an important character and that Peter's sort of story ends when Paul gets in the picture. Peter's also still doing his thing. But for purposes known only to God, the emphasis goes to Paul. And that's kind of what I wanted to do. So same thing I want to do. So if you were to ask me, who are your main characters, it's kind of hard for me to say, because it's not so much that I have main characters. I still have support characters, but like, in terms of main characters, I just have characters who take certain emphasis at certain points when it's important, and then other characters who will take the emphasis. Having said that, I do believe one main character who is extremely important to the entire story. Now, you have to learn who that character is when you read the novels. I will just give you the hint. You are introduced to that character before you know really that they're the main character who's you could say is pivotal to the plots and the lore of the story, the background story and stuff like that. you're introduced to that person before you really, at least if I do it right, you're introduced to that person before you really know that they're that kind of character, a very, very, very key character. In fact, I got a couple of them, but I'm thinking of one in particular. But there are a couple characters who, when you're introduced to them, they seem as though they're kind of support characters, or they seem like, I don't want to go too far into the other thing. I'm going to give too much away. But they seem like support characters, but their emphasis will continue to grow and grow and grow, and then you begin to learn, holy smokes, this character is that person. And that's kind of one of the things I want to try to do. But so in the beginning of the novel, it follows two stories in two different areas. It follows one character. His name is Stratos. He's like I said, Stratos is the one. He's in Western Anusia, and he's sort of raised there. He wasn't born there, but he was raised there. For Stratos' character, I wanted to explore, and I hope I'm going to do a good job of this, an idea that came in my mind some time ago from my job. So I have two bosses at my job. As weird as that may sound, because they're both business partners. So one of them is my dad. The other one is a guy named, well, I won't give his name, but so one of them is my dad, and then there's the other guy, Boss Man 2. And they're both almost totally opposite. My dad is a very laid back guy. He does know when he's got to kind of, put the hammer down a little bit, but for the most part, he's a laid back person. And my other boss is not so much like that. He's a very upfront guy. He cares about, you could almost say he's a ruthless businessman, but I don't know if that's really the proper, accurate description. He's just a very straightforward guy. He's one of those people who wears all of his stuff on his sleeves, kind of thing like that. If he's got a problem with you, he'll tell you, and he really won't be apologetic towards it at all. And that's just the way he is. And he's a hard worker, straight businessman, kind of thing like that. And I mean, I've never worked with anybody who works as hard as that guy does. And he's in his 50s and stuff. I mean, he is an entrepreneur and a businessman. And both have taught me lessons in life. My dad has taught me to just kind of not be overwhelmed with things, and that's been a very useful and helpful tool or lesson for me. My other boss, at the same time, I learned the value of work and continue to learn the value of work, mostly from the other guy, not so much my dad. As difficult as that might be to say, is the other guy, the other boss, whose work ethic has inspired me mostly. I think the Lord has used him to show me that I need to be a productive person. I'm at the point now. I really am at the point now where I just can't not be productive. I gotta do something. I do take time to just kind of sit and relax, sure, yeah. But when I'm relaxing, I'm doing something. I'm not just kind of laying down and staring at the ceiling. I'm reading. If I'm kind of not writing, I'm gonna read. And that's pretty much my day, other than working. But at the same time, one of the things that happens that I've learned is that the criticisms of my dad that I get for my work kind of, in a sense, inspire me to want to do better. It's the opposite with my other boss. Whenever I would get criticism from him, and I would calm down after a while, but I'd just get so angry. I'd get angry at him. I've almost quit several times, just so sick of hearing it. I feel like I just can't please him. There's just nothing you can do. It's just impossible. I get so tired of it, and I've gotten so angry. I'm ashamed of how angry I've allowed myself to get, and it's strange because both of them sort of offer the same criticisms, but one makes me angry and the other one doesn't. Uh, and like I said, after a while though, I do calm down and I go, Boss Man 2 was right. I'm wrong. I screwed up. I messed up. It's on me, and I'm ashamed. And so I one of the things I got the idea of as I was thinking about this, I got the idea for Stratos, and I don't mean this in any way, shape, or form against Boss Man 2. It just gave me an idea to have Stratos contrast with Stratos. What Stratos needs is he needs a father figure in his life to teach him how to basically be a man. And he seems like a man as the story begins, right? Yeah. But he's very immature in many places. He's super sarcastic, and he just doesn't he doesn't handle situations very well. And he's willing. Sometimes he's supposed to be protecting two kids who kind of fall into his lap unwittingly, and he just wishes that never happened. But and he's not ready for it, and he just he gets so frustrated and something. And sometimes he gets, in a certain sense, abusive, not physically abusive towards them, but like verbally and stuff like that. He lets out his anger on them a lot and stuff, and just shows very unmanly qualities and stuff like that. All because he's trying to please his boss, who's the only father figure he has. And his boss's name is Broden. He's a mercenary gang leader, and like I said, he's all Stratos has. Stratos, and one of the things that the story explores as you go throughout is it explores Stratos' origins. Who is he? Because you begin to learn that he's not like other mercenaries. While he's still immature and a lot of stuff, he's very self-sacrificial. He doesn't like the kids, but he goes out of his way to keep them safe. He just can't help but do it. And it's a strange thing. You kind of learn more about him as the story goes, but you kind of start to get the idea. Stratos may act like he's from these parts, but he ain't from these parts. He's from somewhere else. And the whole idea is to get you wondering, where is he from? I want to know where he's from. And that's a question that will be answered as the story goes. But anyways, Stratos is trying to impress his boss, Broden. He wants to be like him. He's his only father figure. Stratos won't admit that he's a father figure. He doesn't want to admit that. He's just a prideful guy. He's not very well disciplined. He's just arrogant, sarcastic, cynical, these kinds of things. Not very good qualities, obviously. And he's ruthless, too. Stratos is ruthless. He'll kill people. He will. He has killed people in the story. He does kill people in the story. And he's willing to kill people. And he doesn't want to be Mr. Nice Guy. He doesn't want to be Mr. Touchy-feely guy. Stuff like that. He tries to fight those kinds of things as best he can. But he knows deep down he's an empathetic person. Even though he tries not to be. But anyways, and then you're gonna contrast that with somebody he's gonna meet later on at the very end of book 1. He's gonna meet somebody, a man, a different guy. I can't tell you who he is. You have to read it. Who sort of becomes a father figure of Stratos again. Stratos ends up, he doesn't want to, but he just can't help but look at this man and feel like he needs to impress this guy. That there's something about this guy, this mysterious figure you're going to learn about. There's just something about him that Stratos just feels like, I want to prove this guy to prove to this guy that I'm a man. Now this guy, like Broden, like I said, it becomes a sort of father figure to Stratos, but in a different way. All Broden ever does is make Stratos angry, and he enrages Stratos. But this guy, even though Stratos gets frustrated a lot, Stratos can't help but feel like this guy makes Stratos look at himself and want to be a better man. There's something about this guy. So the one guy, Broden, just angers and infuriates Stratos. The other guy inspires him. And it's a contrast between two different kinds of men, and potential father figures. What kind of father should a real father be? Should he be a father who just makes his child angry all the time? Who's a father who's still struggling with apparently his own pride and arrogance and stuff? Or a man who inspires his child, his kids, to be better? And that's kind of one of the themes I'm exploring. And that's what happens in the next book and the books after that. As Stratos' relationship to this man kind of continues to grow and grow. And at the same time, Stratos also has to struggle with his empathy, towards the twins, obviously. And you see him grow closer and closer to the twins that he first just can't stand. He grows more and more closer to them in the book and throughout the story too. But so that's Stratos. Stratos is over there, and on the other side, at the same time, is another character. Her name is Anastaria, and she's a half-blooded elf, and means she's part elf and part Aenman. So if you were to translate that, part elf, part human, part man-ish, like human, the reason why I call them Aenman and not man is because it's based on my worldview. I believe all humanity, whether you're black, white, red, yellow, whatever, made in the image of God. We're all the same in that sense. We're made in the image of God. And I believe that the same thing in this world too. I carry that same concept in this world. Dwarf, elf, Aenman, whatever, made in the image of God. That's why I don't want to make that distinction between elf and man, because they're all basically humankind. So I didn't, instead of using man for the ordinary folk, I just called them Aenmen. So that's why I add that little difference. Anyways, so she's part Aenmen and part elf, and she has a sort of mysterious origin as well. Her origin story isn't related to Stratos's, but just noting that. But anyway, her name's Anastaria, and she is adopted into an elvish clan, like the Wood Elves. In this story, you can think of the Wood Elves as kind of like the Native Americans here in America. They're kind of like that. They kind of live out in the wilderness, sort of thing. And there was just a brief little history thing in the lore and the history of this world. There are Wood Elves and High Elves. Now, most fantasy stories, you have, not only a character difference, you could say, between Wood Elves and High Elves, but you have even a physiological difference between them. And not in this world, not in my world. They're not really all that different. They're basically all elves. But they're distinguished by their class. So the High Elves are the elvish people. So there was a major split when the elvish kingdoms fell. There was a major split between how to deal with the fall of the elvish empire. The High Elves sort of thought that the best way is to get into the political arena. So the High Elves kind of went the liberal route, and the Wood Elves went to the more uber conservative route. And so they're off in the woods now, basically in regional territories that they own, and they maintain a high tradition. You can think of it as the Pharisees versus, I don't know, the some of the other sects, and I forgot their name. It starts with an E, but the more liberal sects of the Jews in first century Palestine. Anyways, that's kind of like what it ended up being, and Anastaria gets adopted into a Wood Elvish clan. And she becomes part of that clan, but they never really fully accept her as one of them, no matter how much she fights and tries to prove herself as one of them, because she's half-blooded, and they consider half-bloods to be no true blood. The Wood Elves especially look upon the rest of the Aenman world. They look down upon them. They look at them as kind of like the first century Jews to the Gentiles. They just saw them as lesser people. There's quite a bit of a racist tone. So Anastaria, she's raised in that kind of environment, and she herself develops a bit of a racist attitude towards the Aenmen. She's closed off from them, obviously. She grows up in a clan. She's trained in some of their in one of their programs called the Order of the Leaf. It's a special agent sort of thing for the Wood Elves. She's one of their reconnaissance agents, but she also possesses a unique power. She's a master. Masters are people who can use magic in the story. Not everybody can use magic in my story. Only what are called masters can use the magic. But she's a master, and all elves are masters. Everybody who has elvish blood is capable of mastery. Anyways, she has a special kind of mastery power, and it's an ancient legendary one called Prime. A Prime. She's called a Prime. And they were thought to be extinct, but I'm not going to go into the detail of that. But just only to say that mysteriously the masters are reappearing, which is something that you sort of learn about as the story goes. But her power is supposed to be kept hidden because there's a lot of people who out there who in the dark, who would want it. So she's basically considered a relic. It has to be protected. But she manages during when her clan is when the story begins, her clan is like under attack by a mysterious enemy known only as the Black Priest. And he's so mysterious they don't know if it's a man or if it's an organization, anything like that. They don't even know. They have almost nothing to work with other than legend. But that the clan comes under attack by the Black Priest, and the Black Priest tries to take certain artifacts from the Wood Elves, because the Wood Elves are collecting artifacts of the ancient world, trying to bring them back so they can basically restore the Elvish Empire. That's what they want to do. Problem is, Wood Elvish clans are fighting each other over how to do even that. So there's a lot of disunity going on between the Wood Elves even there. Anyways, so the Wood Elves are trying to track him down, and they think they've found him when the story begins. And that's where Anastaria is given the chance. She sees this as an opportunity to prove herself once and for all to her clan, to go and find the Black Priest and destroy him for good, him or it for good. Come back and then be welcomed by the clan. It's like, oh, our hero, she's awesome, she's amazing. Let's make her queen of the empire, kind of like that. But as her quest begins, let's just say, it's that saying, no plan survives contact with the enemy. Things go kind of haywire pretty fast, and she ends up off track quite a bit, and making friends. Friends with Aenmin, and she starts with her racist sort of tone and looking down upon them and using them, and after a while she just can't seem to do it anymore. She makes friends, companions, and she starts to care about them, and one in particular whose name is Odin. She starts to grows close to him, and in the beginning he's sort of like he's sort of a thief, and he's the total opposite of her. She's very disciplined. She has a very high sense of justice and stuff like that, uncompromising, kind of thing like that. Odin's very different, very laid back. He's kind of loose with justice, and things like that. But at the same time, they can't help but kind of he starts out, obviously he likes her and stuff like that, and trying to win her over a little bit, and she starts out, it's kind of like that old, you could say it's an old cliche, but I'm hoping it's going to be kind of cute. And they kind of grow close to each other as the story goes. Now, of course, there's going to be some heartbreak too, because she's not who he thinks she is. She's lied to him the whole time, because she's not supposed to tell people who she actually is. Because if the Aenmin lands find out that a Wood Elf, what they call a zealot, is in there, because the Aenmin and the Wood Elves are not in good relationship with each other. They're kind of like in a Cold War stance right now. If they find an agent deep inside Aenmin lands, it's going to be bad news. So she's lying the whole time, even about her own name. So she has to figure out how to deal with, because she realized, oh no, I kind of like this guy. And when I get home, my elders are going to be so angry with me. But she has to figure out how to deal with this, because she's been lying to him the whole time, especially after she made him tell the truth about himself. but yet and give him a big old lecture about being honest with her, and she's not even being honest with him. So there's going to be that how that's going to come apart and stuff like that. That's all in book one, by the way. This is just book one. So you got these two different characters in two different parts of the world. Eventually, they're going to come together, and things are gonna they're gonna begin to, like I was talking about at the beginning, all these pieces moving. They're all gonna come and clash, and so we'll see what happens then. But so that's kind of like the basic idea of what's going on in book one. Try to give a lot without giving away too much. So the things I'm trying to explore in terms of making a story, I do spend a lot of time still on developing the lore of my story, and I use as a guideline my own sort of studies in history. One of the things I want to make sure I don't leave out, that you see left out so often in so many movies, is religion. I never watched the new Joker movie. I'm not sure if I ever want to. I don't understand why we are fascinated with villains. I think it's just kind of disturbing. Anyways, but I had heard that there is almost completely no sign of the church anywhere in this movie. It's a complete nihilistic Gotham City. There is no church anywhere, and you see in a lot of these movies, where you would think that there'd be some aspect of religion somewhere. It's completely non-existent. And again, I think that's reflective of worldviews. The creator's worldview has as one of its principles, the church has nothing to say about any of this. That religion has nothing to say about any of this. That's one of the presuppositions behind a lot of this stuff. Now, my presupposition is, and I think it's a well-grounded presupposition because history demonstrates it. My presupposition is that religion does have, even if it's false religion does play a role in all of this. And that's one of the things I want to make sure that I'm including in my story, is that, especially when you look in history, in history of the world, so that religion was huge in why people made so many different decisions. Religion was at the center of society. And it still is, honestly. When you think about it, it still is. Even in our secular world, it's just secular religion. I was just thinking about Jeff Durbin and James White's debate with those two atheists a couple months ago. I never watched it. I'm not sure if I ever am going to watch it. But one of the things I was thinking about this when I was taking a shower this morning. But I was thinking about it was that, when you think about it, because everything I'm going off of what I heard about the debate. But when you think about it, it's almost like, really, well, this is what I look at that Dr. Clark guy and all the rambling he went on, and compare him to Steven Anderson, and see what the difference is. Can you tell the difference between him and Steven Anderson when Steven Anderson goes on one of his meltdowns and stuff like that, or any of those King James onlyist weird cults or whatever? Any of them. How much more different did he sound to them? And he's an atheist. He's supposed to be no religion. He's up there preaching and condemning and blah, 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 doing all the stuff that they make fun of us Christians for based on what Steven Anderson does. But how much different are they than him? It's the same thing. It's just you're just arguing a different worldview. That's it. That's all it is. But you're still doing dogmatic stuff like that, and these guys, blah, yeah, and condemning and all that stuff. I feel like the only reason he didn't condemn them to hell is because he doesn't believe there's a hell. That's really it. So there's really not a whole lot of difference. So religion is still permeates. It still absolutely permeates in our world today. It's just a different kind of religion. I would say it's the religion and cult of death. Anyways, but so I want to make sure that the religious element, and not a simplistic religious element. Again, there's different religions in this world that you're gonna see as the story goes. There's different religions and perspectives and whatever. and you'll see them flesh out. You'll see how they compel a character to behave in certain ways, and things like that. But so what I want to do is just kind of close out here with a little bit of a message. One of the reasons why I love storytelling, probably the primary reason why I love storytelling, it kind of goes back to what I was talking about with resolution and meaning and purpose. This is an area where I may get a little pretty unpopular with even the Christian crowd, and I want to make this assertion and then explain it. If you believe that life has a purpose and that everything has meaning, even the worst events have a meaning, that it wasn't in vain, it wasn't for nothing. The only kind of worldview that can justify that kind of belief is if your worldview has at its core the doctrine of predestination, and predestination by a personal God. And that's one of the themes I'm going to be exploring in my story too. Predestination. Are we predestined? Again, I want to try and make sure I do this in the story to genuinely ask the question, not poison the well, but ask the questions, because I want the audience to think: are we predestined, or are we not? And by the end, my analysis is going to say we are predestined. Absolutely. Why do I believe that? Well, let me read a passage here from Isaiah 46, verse 9. Yes. I'm going to start in verse 8, actually. In Isaiah 46, verse 8. This is the Lord speaking. He says, "Remember this and stand firm. Recall it to mind, you transgressors. Remember the former things of old. For I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will accomplish all my purpose." Verse 11, "Calling a bird of prey from the east, the man of my counsel from a far country. I have spoken, and I will bring it to pass. I have purposed, and I will do it." So that's verses 8 through 11 of Isaiah 46. A very clear statement that God holds time and space in his hand. And because he does, its entire function, its entire existence, all the gears that move and turn, they move and turn because of him. That means the reason why I can sit here is because of him. If God didn't want me to sit here, he would make it so that I wouldn't be sitting here. If God didn't want me to have a gift, I guess you could say, I believe it's a gift of storytelling, he wouldn't give it to me. Because he has a purpose in that. But if you believe that everything has a meaning to it, the only way something can have a meaning is if it was intended to be. If its existence was meant to accomplish something. That's the only way something can have meaning. If it doesn't have a reason to exist, if there's no cosmological overarching purpose for it, it doesn't mean anything. So again, you go back to the storytelling. When you're watching scenes in movies and stuff like that, every single scene cannot be there for the sake of being just a silly, dumb scene. Because if it is, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't add anything to the story. It's all for a purpose. It's all driving the story to one final resolution. It has to do that. Every single scene that I make in my story It's got a purpose. It's if I make a scene and I ask myself, this doesn't really do anything for it, I get rid of it. It's gone. It doesn't mean anything. But it all exists for an ultimate purpose. Every single character who is where they're at is there for a purpose. There's a reason why they're there. And it's to an ultimate end goal. The only kind of worldview that allows something like that consistently is a worldview of predestination. Anastasia in my story is predestined to be who she is by me, the author. And I have a reason for that. Other characters are predestined. Even it's going to seem like it. A lot of it's going to seem sort of just coincidental. Even with Anastasia's meeting of Odin and eventually the bounty hunter Rollick, meeting of them is going to. It seems coincidental, but it's not. It's all it has a purpose. It may not seem clear at the very beginning, but eventually you're going to learn that Rollick's meeting of Anastasia was not coincidence. Stratos's meeting of this particular other character was not a coincidence. All of these things you're going to begin to learn aren't coincidence at all. That divine appointments were made, you could say. It's the same thing with us in this life. If you, I mean, how many of us, not me, but how many of you guys could say when you met your spouse or whoever, whatever, met somebody important in your life, when you look back at that person you met, can you say, man, if it hadn't been for this, I would never have met this person? And the just how valuable they are in my life is I can't describe it. I can't thank God more for it. And yet, if it hadn't been for it, they weren't really what I was looking for. And then boom, there they are. And you think about them when they meet you. I mean, so when I think about the people I've met in my life who are important in my life personally, think about this. The billions and billions of people in this world, and that's the person you met. To be that kind of person that you needed in your life to help you, and then you realize, man, if it wasn't for this person, I don't know what I would do. When I came to this dark moment in my life or something like that. Well, if you don't believe that God predestines things, you have to look at that and go, totally coincidence. And so, but you look at a story, I think a story is a great way to illustrate this. When you think about a story, when you really think about it, a story tells a story of predestination. What's amazing to me, when I was watching the third Star Trek movie, the latest one, which wasn't that great, but what's his face? J.J. Abrams has just this awesome ability to take certain elements that happen in the story that seem kind of like pointless, and then suddenly they become huge key to victory in the very end. So when one character, I forgot his name, and I feel Scotty meets that sort of pale girl, the alien girl. When he meets her, she's listening to this kind of really loud and noisy music, and he's like, he's trying to work and stuff like that, or they're trying to fix the ship, and he's like, what is that? It's just kind of like ruining his focus, and so it seems like something that's just a complete nuisance. But as towards the end, when they need to figure out a way to defeat this sort of hive mind mentality of this big old swarm of enemies, that's just overwhelming, they learn that it's a hive mind. They're in perfect syncretic order, And you have to completely disrupt that in order to just destroy the entire thing. And then he realizes that they need something loud and obnoxious and confusing. And he's like, I got just the thing. And it was that super pale chick's music. You look at something like that and you go, that was exactly what they needed, right when they needed it. And at the same time, the people who make things like that, as cool as they are, will tell you that something like that happened because the universe is blind, chance, whatever. I find that a little hard to believe. It sounds to me more like somebody's watching over them and guiding them through all of this and gave them just what they needed right when they needed it. An impersonal, lifeless universe can't do that to you, can't do that for you. But a personal God who holds the universe in his hands, designs the universe in such a way that we can understand it and we can know it. That's a completely different story. And you can't truly consistently have the idea that people are where exactly they need to be unless you believe and you start with a God who's personal, who decrees these things in such a way that, well, let me explain it this way. So again, go back to storytelling. What do I want? I want, there's couple of different things, but one of the things that I want to do is to teach Anastasia to a form of unconditional love, and that we are all ultimately the same. In what way am I going to do that? By having her go on this quest. And there's various different ways. Bella, I didn't even mention Bella. Anastasia meets Bella, takes Bella under her wing. Bella becomes a very important character throughout the story. And Anastasia becomes just the perfect teacher and mentor for her through her growing. Bella's a little kid, but through Bella's growing, Anastasia just becomes the right kind of teacher and mentor for her. And so when they meet, you have to wonder, was that just pure coincidence, or was that divine appointment? Obviously, it was divine appointment. I intended these things to happen. So I intend to have Bella grow up to become a very powerful master in the story. And the way I do that is having Anastasia leaving her, home to eventually to make a wrong turn, because she actually she gets lost. Anastasia gets lost in Levington, in one of the cities. She gets lost, and it's because she got lost, she runs into Bella. And that meeting, as inconvenient as that was for Anastasia, changes her life, changes Bella's life. And that was all meant for something. I predestined that. I purposed that. I made that so. Every single character is predestined to end up in a certain place. But the way I do it is based on their activities and their personalities, who they are. That's how I end up doing it. And that's how God, it's a way to look at how God works. God intends to do things. As he just says right here, he has purposed it. He's going to accomplish all of his purposes. And he uses human behavior to do it. And that's the Reformed doctrine of predestination. And that's what I believe. I absolutely believe that. So one of the reasons, so you should ask me, why do I love storytelling? Because I love the doctrine of predestination. And I look at history too, the same way. And that's why history is so important to my story. Trying to use real world history to develop the history of my world, in this my fantasy world. It's one of the reasons why I love history, because history is telling us a story. It's showing, how God has worked in the Bible, and it shows how he works outside of the Bible, here in what some of us would call the Gentile age. Last year when I went to Manti to share the gospel with Mormons, we went up to the Mormon Training Center, MTC. I hated it up there. I don't like it being up there. Don't like it. I loved Manti. I just did not like being at MTC. I don't know why. I just didn't like it. Beautiful view of the mountains right there, but other than that, I would still go. I'd still go again, but I just wasn't an enjoyable experience. But one of the meetings I had out there was a guy named, I still remember his name. His name was Lyman. I know it's not a name we're usually used to, but his name was Lyman. And we got to talking. And he obviously, from the beginning, did not want to talk to me. I walked up and talked to him, but we just started talking. And for a while, he's kind of like, we're in a little bit of a argument. Not like argument as in, not like that, but like back and forth, exchanging of our opinions and our beliefs and stuff like that. After a while, he kind of stopped. He kind of just stopped trying to do that. I don't know if he was just trying to get out of there or what, but after a while, he just kind of just sits there and listens, and I mean, we went for like an hour and a half. It did not feel like an hour and a half. It felt like 20 minutes. For like an hour and a half, we just went and just talking and talking and talking. And he's on his bike and stuff, and he's just riding around the neighborhood. And then it's when he sort of just tells me, I've been struggling with a lot of things, and you kind of helped me out a little bit here. Give me some things to think about. And I'm glad for that. I don't know what happened to him. I've never talked to or seen him since. But I told him that day. I told him, I don't believe in coincidences. I believe everything happens for a reason, for a purpose. I believe this was a divine appointment here between you and me. God, for reasons known only to him, he wanted me here and he wanted you here for this meeting. And he just kind of was like, I could just see it, at least to me, unless I'm just really bad at body language, just seemed like he just thought that was very fascinating to think about. That somehow, some way, God intended this meeting. And for what? I don't know. Other than preaching the gospel to people, but I shared the gospel with him, and he's like, all right, well, I gotta go. And he went, I think he went west. I remember quickly. It's like southwest. He went the opposite direction of the big old mountain that's sitting right up there. Yeah, he went west. He just went that way, to the left of me. And that was one of the coolest conversations I had. But I meant every word that I said to him. That I truly believe that was a conversation that was meant to happen. And that's the same thing with everything. I don't believe that God makes us go halfway across the world and talk to this one person and think that was just a complete, total accident. That was meant to be. Everything is meant to be. Even the most tragic things in our lives were meant to be. You're going to see the characters in my story. They're going to go through a lot of tragedy. But is that meaningless? No. There's a purpose for it. There's a purpose behind it. There's a purpose behind me, in a sense, destroying their lives. Just like there's a purpose behind God destroying our lives. There's a reason for it. And the only thing that gets us through that is keeping our eyes on him. So I wanted to end with that because, predestination obviously is a very tough thing for us to think about, to contemplate. But like I said, what things I'm going to be exploring is just that are we predestined, or, is time just kind of going, is the future set, and if you believe that God knows the future, okay, well then the future is set. You have to believe that the future's set, because if God knows the future absolutely and unchangeably, then the future can't change. Because if the future changes, then God's knowledge of the future has to change. And so the future is set somehow, in some way, shape, or form. That means everybody in the story who, and again, these are concepts I'm going to be exploring, who end up in a certain place, they were predestined by something. It wasn't by God, because God just knows the future. That's all he does. He just knows it. Can't do anything about it. He just knows it. They so there's a form of fatalism that they're just fated to be there. It just didn't really serve a purpose. It's where you're always going to end up, no matter how hard you try. And again, some of the things I want to do is use scripture. Divine scripture is important in my story too, for various different reasons. Deciphering messages and prophecy, as well as, if you look at Cyprus in the Bible, Cyprus was predestined. Was Cyprus going to do what he did for Israel because of his own autonomous free will, and God saw it in the future? Or was he going to do what he did because divine scripture said he was going to do it? Obviously, it's the latter. Divine scripture declares it. So, because, as it says here, what I just read you, God says he's purposed it and he's going to do it. That's why Cyprus did what he did. He was predestined to do what he did for Israel by God. And so I'm using scripture to sort of do the same thing. You're going to have characters who are going to be sort of declared to end up in a certain way, and it's going to seem kind of weird and stupid and foolish because prophets always look dumb and stupid, right, when they're making these proclamations. Well, all of a sudden, when you see it happen, you go, whoa, like it's going to things like that. So predestination is very important by scripture, and ultimately by somebody who has the power to declare that, and that is, of course, God himself. But I'm also going to have characters who are going to start to realize their role in destiny and try to run from that destiny and figure out that the more they run, the more they fulfill it, that they can't escape it. It's like Joseph's brothers, who, when they hear about Joseph's dream and his vision, which was divine revelation, that they would eventually bow to him. They tried to no way, that ain't going to happen. So they tried to get rid of him so they would be sure that wouldn't happen, not realizing that their getting rid of him was only part of making it ultimately happen. In the end, they were at the mercy of their brother. Now, and all that, what that proves to us, if we're reading scripture properly, what that proves to us is that you cannot escape your divine appointments, your destiny. We all have a destiny to fulfill, all to the praise and honor of God's glory. Because and I think one of the reasons why people struggle with something like this is because we're raised in a culture that elevates human autonomy in a way that should never have been elevated according to scripture itself. The story is about God. It's not about us. We're part of the story. Just like in my story, my novel, the story is about what I want to get across. And of course, obviously, what I want to get across is what God wants. At least that's what I hope. My hope and my prayer is that I'm doing all this for the glory of God. But the story revolves around my desires, and it's because it revolves around my desires, the characters are made and formed around my purposes. It's my purpose. Same thing in our real world, is that we're part of a big, amazing story that comes to life, and it's all for God's purposes. It's for what he wants to get done, what he has purpose, as I read to you right here. He's purposed it, and we share in that story in one way, shape, or form. So no life is ever meaningless. No life is ever purposeless. No matter how. And look, I sometimes sit in bed at night. Sometimes I'm wondering, why keep going? It just seems like I'm beating my head against the wall. It really feels like that sometimes. I'm not just saying that to get some pity out of people. It really feels like I'm just beating my head against the wall. I am grasping after the wind. Like nothing that I do is going to amount to anything. Even this, writing my story here. Sometimes it feels that way. But I have to fight that and to realize those are feelings, and I can't trust my feelings. So I do my best. But you just got to keep going. You keep going. That's what I'm doing. I'm just like, look, it's hard to get people trying to look at this. It'd be great if I got more people to look at this story of mine. It'd be a little bit of a motivating factor. But I understand people are busy. I get it. You got stuff to do, and I understand. but so for me, what I do is I just maybe I'm gonna be one of those people, kind of like Token and Lewis, whose work becomes popular after they're dead. I don't know, but I just want to get. All I know is I just got to keep going. Just got to keep going, keep going, and keep going, and keep going. That's all I know. So that's just what I do, because I absolutely believe it's for a purpose. Because I believe in divine appointments. I believe in predestination. And just one quick thing. That's one of the things I love about Lord of the Rings. Actually, a couple of quick things. And another one of the things I want to explore is most movies you see today, the main character's greatest obstacle that they have to get over is their own self-doubt and their own lack of confidence. They just need to be more confident. You got to get brave and just blah. And they call it bravery. We confuse bravery with courage. They call it courage because I guess courage sounds more noble and humble, but it's really just bravery that they're asking characters to be. Bravery is like you just, nothing. Screw all that other stuff. I'm going for it. Just boom, just running in there, just kind of charging right in. That's bravery. Courage, as C.S. Lewis said, is what is? I gotta find it. I don't want to. This is something I do not want to butcher. C.S. Lewis, and I think he said in the Screwtape Letters, if I recall. Courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point, or at the point of testing. That's what courage is. It's when, how far you're willing to go, and in a certain sense ignore the dangers that you are absolutely aware of, and are overwhelming. See, when you watch The Lord of the Rings, one of the most beautiful scenes in the movie of The Lord of the Rings is when Frodo, at the very end of the Fellowship of the Ring, Frodo is standing on that shoreline with the ring in his hand, and it's just quiet for a few moments. And he just, I wish the ring had never come to me. I wish none of this had happened. You see in Frodo, he doesn't want to do this. He doesn't want to be here. It's funny. It's when he's growing up, he's hearing all the stories of adventure and saving the world. And he's like, oh, those are beautiful stories. And now here he is in the thick of it. And he's like, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. This is horrible. I can't take this. This is too much of a burden to bear. And then he hears that voice of Gandalf in his head. So do all who live to see such times. But it's not for them to decide. And whether Tolkien meant to do it or not, he's preaching predestination right there. You have to decide is what to do with the time that you've been given and with what you've been given. You don't, in other words, you're in God's world. You don't get to tell God, hey, look what Moses tried to do. He tried to get himself out of being God's prophet to Israel. You don't get to do that. Why? Because you're in God's world. You're in God's world. You're in his story. And you're going to play your role, whether you like it or not. But at the same time, at the end of Moses' life, do you think Moses regretted? I say the same thing about Abraham. Abraham went through so much struggle. He almost had to kill his own son. Do you think at the end of Abraham's life, he regretted any of that? I don't think he did. I think he was, at the very end, during these times of struggle, sure, yeah, there's that point of like, I just want this to end. I just wish this never happened. I kind of feel the same way about this COVID-19 thing, but I'm pretty sure looking somewhere down the road, looking back, and be like, not sure I really regret it. I think the same thing with Abraham and Moses. At the end, I just got done. I'm in Joshua now. I just got done with Moses' story in Deuteronomy. At the end, I don't think he regretted anything. I think that his greatest regret is that he didn't get to go into the promised land. I think that was his greatest regret. We are in a story, and time is, in a certain sense, running out, and you got to go. You don't have time to sit here and wish that things weren't the way they are. They are, and you just got to go. And that's kind of the way I've been working myself. But the courage thing, I don't want that to be I don't want bravery to be the theme of this story. I want it to be more of courage. I'm talking about real courage, like what C.S. Lewis just said. Courage is something that you do because you're terrified and you're scared. You're because, see, so many misunderstandings of people of history. Like in the Reformation, we have cartoonized versions of the reformers, that they were like the new apostles. Really, honestly, we see them like that. And they weren't. They were just ordinary men like you and me. They had so many errors, so many mistakes, so much that we can learn from about their mistakes. And, Martin Luther was a timid and fearful guy. He was scared of a lot of things, a lot of silly little things that you and I probably wouldn't be scared of. And yet we look at Martin Luther and go, why in the world? But yet look at what he did, though. Look at all the amazing things that he did. How did he do something like that? Well, the way you answer that question is first to recognize that Luther was a human being, flawed, sinful human being too. So was Calvin. They were flawed, sinful human beings, like you and me. When you elevate them to a level that is unrealistic, these were just chested men, with their chest out, just going rah, just going at it. When you have that kind of position, you're never going to really produce people like that in the future, because your expectations are way too high. You have to recognize these were fallible human beings. They were human like you and me. They put their pants on one leg at a time, just like you and I do. That kind of stuff. So I want to try and just dispel this idea of super brave and just, you see in this just the corny-ish sort of movies where they're like I said, they're great at the character's main flaw is that he's doubting himself, and he just needs to believe in himself, and then all of a sudden you just see them get, and all of a sudden just this power comes out of nowhere and just makes no sense whatsoever, and it's just really, really silly, and you don't really learn anything from that. And all you're teaching people is that if you just get passionate enough, you can accomplish anything. Well, it's not easy to do. You can't just wish I was more passionate. You can't do that. It's just not possible to do, and you do more harm to people. One of the ways I learned this lesson is through actually doing evangelism. I look at Jeff Durbin and I think, see, like, man, look at he just does it, man. And I just wish I could do that. And Jeff Durbin will, of course, tell you, of course you can do that. You can do that. Any Christian can do that. But what I think is missing is something that was told to me before I went to Manti. I was terrified. I was just, what's going to happen out there? I was just really scared. I almost went home several times. I almost didn't go through with it. But one of the guys I went there with said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, it's scary at first. It's always scary. And it's normal. I'm paraphrasing a lot of what he said there, but what I know he absolutely said to me is this. He said, you have to push through the fear. You got to push through it. If you're sitting there waiting, and now I'm adding to what he said, but if you're sitting there waiting for God to give you the bravery to do this, you're going to be waiting there for a long time, because it ain't going to happen. Well, it most likely won't happen. And sometimes it could. I'm not saying he couldn't do it, but but most likely you're going to be waiting there for a long time. Because what if God's not trying to teach you to be brave? He's trying to teach you to be courageous. He's trying to teach you to be reliant upon him. What if that's why God doesn't take your fear away? What if God wants you to be afraid? He wants you to be scared. Because the more scared you are, the more you're going to trust in him. You're going to rely upon him. When you just got this false sense of bravery in yourself and your ability to do it, you're not relying on him, and you don't learn anything. And that's what I learned, and that's why I want to go do it again. And I get, when I was getting ready to go to General Conference this year, which didn't happen because of coronavirus stuff, I was getting the same stuff too. I was actually getting excited as we were getting closer, but I was still getting the whole, what could happen? I don't know. This is getting crazy. I don't know what the heck what am I getting myself into? But I ignored it. I was just ignoring it. That's how I have to do everything now. I have to just ignore my fear of whatever it is, however irrational or even rational my fear is. I just got to ignore it. Just like, yeah, screw you. I just got to go do this. We'll see what happens, whatever. And so what I want to do in my story is characters who are terrified, who are scared, who don't even want to be where they end up, but they have to do what they have to do. And you're going to see their fear, how overwhelming it is, how scared they are, how it even defeats them. And I don't want to have any of my characters do the cliche thing of scream really loud, make a really angry face, and then blah, beat the bad guy. I want them to be afraid, scared, as normal human beings are. That doesn't mean that confidence isn't a good thing. It's always a good thing to have. But more than that is courage, to be able to push through the fear. Those are things I want to be able to show. So with all that and stuff, and not exactly how I wanted to close it, but wow, I went long there. I hope you made it through this far. So talking about storytelling, what I want to do and sort of my vision, well, stuff like that. I didn't get to talk about my book, this one back here, which was just a Champion King of the Remnant, a short story that I made. It was meant to be simple, but still pretty, obviously I put a lot of work into it, even though it's more of a simple read. It's meant to be simple. This story, though, the one I'm working on, is much more complex. Obviously, it's going to be a pretty big book. So I'm doing a lot more in terms of chapters and character development and plot development and lore and everything like that. There's so many elements to this thing. So that's why this one's taking me a lot longer. I hope that when it's finished, you'll check it out. That you'll look at my other one here as more of my introductory into the world of writing. That's what I wanted it to be. This one's going to be, I'm investing a whole lot more time in this next book, in this next series of books. So I hope it's enjoyable. I hope that it will glorify God, and it will edify you, and just we'll see what the Lord does with it. So that's my little thing on storytelling, why I love it, why I think it's important. Soli Deo Gloria. God bless. Talk to you guys later.